I've always found this story to be one of the most influential and important in the early years of the show. It's one of only a handful of stories to clock in at only 2 episodes, and the circumstances surrounding this story are quite unique. Initially, the BBC allocated the first filming block for the show at 4 episodes, which covers an unearthly child. However, they quickly informed the crew that the first block was now 13 episodes instead of the measly 4. They could supply the Daleks and Marco Polo as the next 2 stories, however that would take the total to 18 episodes, which was too much. So their only option was to do just the Daleks, taking them to 11 episodes with a brand new story to take up the last 2 slots in the filming block. The catch is, they went over budget with the first 2 stories, so there was no money for new sets or for guest actors. That meant David Whittaker, the script editor for the show up until early season 2, had to write a story taking place entirely within the TARDIS with only the Doctor, Susan, Ian and Barbara. And believe it or not, they did it. The crew all wake up from the explosion at the end of the last episode, seemingly suffering from some sort of amnesia. They temporarily revert back to the characters they were before the start of the show, showing how far they've come in just 2 stories. Ian especially acts a lot more stubborn and proper compared to how we've seen him when thrown into action.
What's going on here?
The Doctor is hurt by the explosion and Susan goes to help. However, upon discovering that the TARDIS doors are open, she theorises that an alien life form has boarded the ship and taken control. As their memories slowly start coming back to them, Susan suddenly collapses and Ian takes her to lie down where she tries to stab Ian. Thankfully she doesn't go through with it. It doesn't stop her yet though as she attempts to stab Barbara a few minutes later, although Barbara is quick to stop her with the power of words. Susan believes one of them may be possessed by the alien life form. It's her! She's possessed. She's the one. Anyway, they're attempting to sabotage the ship. The Doctor, now feeling better, accuses Ian and Barbara of being the ones sabotaging the ship in a vain attempt by them to return to home in 1963. In a great scene, Barbara shuts him up by literally reminding him of the first 2 serials.
You ought to go down on your hands and knees and thank us. But gratitude's the last thing you'll ever have, or any sort of common sense either.
But gets interrupted by the sight of the melting clock. Yeah, something really isn't right here. The Doctor returns with some drinks to help them all get to sleep for the night. Oh, it's him. It's him. He's the one. He's possessed. But Ian isn't having any of it and still wants to confront the Doctor over his treatment of Barbara and himself.
For good or for evil?
One man's law is another man's crime. Sleep on it, Chesterton. Sleep on it.
Later that night, the Doctor wanders around the TARDIS after everyone is asleep, approaching the TARDIS console, but before he can do anything, he's attacked by Ian! I knew it from the start. He's the one that's possessed. Ian faints after this, and the Doctor returns to accusing Barbara and Ian of sabotage. Susan believes her grandfather, but after he threatens to throw them off the ship, Susan objects. Just before the Doctor can do so, however, an alarm sounds from the fault locator. As it turns out, it's a fault with the TARDIS itself, as apparently the power source of the TARDIS is attempting to force its way out, and they have barely minutes left before complete disintegration. Barbara thinks the TARDIS is doing this to alert them of the real issue at hand. The Doctor tells Barbara and Susan that they have 10 minutes remaining, but he reveals to Ian that it's actually only 5 minutes, and he lied to the women because 1960 isn't that in it. He believes the TARDIS has flown into the start of a new solar system, hence the Big Bang fell earlier, but this actually isn't the case. The Doctor pressed the fast return switch, but the spring is broken, so it never stopped going backwards. They've gone to the beginning of our very own solar system, which explains their temporary memory loss as they travelled back in time. The TARDIS has been attempting to warn the crew, which is why the doors were operating weirdly, as well as the fault locator alarm going off, because the TARDIS is alive. It's a real living being. This is the first time where we see a proper instance of this, and as smart as it may be, it can't alert them of a broken string before it happens. I'm being pedantic, of course. The Doctor fixes the switch and everything goes back to normal. He apologises to Ian, who accepts in a nice scene.
You know, there are times when I can read every thought on your face.
Really? Yes. And I always thought that you were a young man without any recrimination in you.
He then does the same with Barbara, who isn't so forgiving at first, but she comes around in another nice scene.
Because I accused you unjustly, you were determined to prove me wrong. So you put your mind to the problem and luckily you solved it.
Finally, the TARDIS lands in a new location, this time in a snow-filled environment. They all suit up as they head out, discovering a massive footprint in the snow just outside the TARDIS. The Edge of Destruction is a story that feels so ahead of its time. It feels almost like an episode of Star Trek, 2 years before Star Trek was even a thing. It allows us to study the characters a lot more, focusing on their relationship and building trust as they have to work through their suspicions to survive. This is something which more modern sci-fi shows did in the future, including the likes of Stargate and Firefly. No other Doctor Who story has proven to be as accidentally influential as this one. It's very short too, clocking in at about 45 minutes in total, which is about the same time as a single episode of the revival series. The Doctor's ego is still getting a reality check here as he constantly berates Ian and Barbara for sabotaging his ship when they did nothing of the sort. It was the TARDIS. And while they never explore the TARDIS being alive further until the third Doctor comes around, this cements that aspect of the show very early on. The Doctor has no control over the TARDIS. She's going to go where she wants to go, and at the end of the story, they end up in yet another place that isn't England in 1963. Despite only being written in 2 days, according to David Whittaker, the story still wasn't shy of controversies. Verity Lambert, the first producer of Doctor Who for its first few seasons, had to write an apology to the BBC Children's Department for the scene where Susan tries to attack Ian and Barbara with a pair of scissors, yet I'm sure they had no problem with all the violence prevalent in the first few stories. We'll come to find that violence and classic Who go hand in hand, as there are plenty more instances of this to come. It begs the question, why market it as a kids show if you're going to show people getting their heads bashed in and vaporised and whatnot? I mean, that educational concept is still prevalent here, with the broken spring scene acted out like they were trying to teach kids about basic engineering or something. So little Billy, how did you get into engineering? It's also, as discussed previously, the cheapest ever produced Doctor Who story, reportedly only costing £2,500 to make in today's money. That's like a month's rent in Edinburgh. No, I'm just kidding. It's less than that. We get to see some good character moments, such as Ian operating the TARDIS controls for the first time, and that's the first time a companion has ever done so. But you know, it's their home. The TARDIS is their home, at least for now. There'll be companions later on who basically walk around like they own the place and become used to the intricacies of the TARDIS console, but aside from that, there's some smart audience involvement here too, with Susan's theory that one of them is possessed by an alien life form. The viewer spends the whole story trying to work out who it is, with misdirection sprinkled throughout. Obviously, it's a much more mundane, everyday explanation in the end, juxtaposed to the sci-fi theme of the serial. I like this one. It's simple and it does entirely what it was written to do, flexing the chemistry of the cast in the meanwhile.